Okay, welcome back. We are now going to shift gears just a little bit and have a patient and caregiver panel. We've done this once or twice, and we found that this is really a wonderful opportunity to share, to talk a little bit about how to move through a neuroendocrine tumor experience. And while everyone is different, I think there's some threads that we've seen. And we also think it's important to have caregivers because this isn't just an individual disease, this is very much a family disease. So we appreciate all the caregivers, not only on our panel, but also in the audience, and your willingness to share with us. So I want to start out with some quick introductions. I'd like to ask our panelists to introduce themselves and whether they are a patient or caregiver, and where they're from, and how long they've been diagnosed or their family member's been diagnosed. So would you like to start for us, Joyce?
Sure. Hi,
Cheryl?
My name is Cheryl Jarrett. I'm a caregiver for my best friend, Joyce Cooley, who has primary lung carcinoid and was diagnosed in 2005.
I'm Leslie Stabinsky-Compton, and I was diagnosed in 2005. I am originally from New Orleans, and I currently live in the Woodlands.
I'm David Bingham. I'm a PNET, diagnosed in 2007, and I'm from Katy, Texas.
I'm Glenora Harrington. I'm a caregiver. That's my husband, Dennis, and he was originally diagnosed in 2006. And now he is was re-diagnosed, I guess you call it, or further diagnosed as metastatic in the past year. So, is that right? You go slide.
Hi, I'm Dennis Harrington, and as my wife said, I was diagnosed actually in 2007, and it seems like forever actually. This disease sticks around for a long time, as we all know, unfortunately. As she mentioned, I had surgery and then treatment and had 5 or 6 pretty good years, and then was started to have some more problems in 2015 or so, and then in 2017 I went back through treatment, couple hospitalizations, the surgery, and then PRRT.
Thank you, Dennis. So one of the first challenges really for any cancer patient, and I think a particular challenge for someone with a rare cancer, is learning what you need to know about your disease and your diagnosis. And I'd like to ask the panelists to share a little bit about what they did to educate themselves and to get to the point that they can be an active participant in their own care or their family member or their friend's care, so that they can be aware and be educated. So who would like to start? David, would you like to start?
Yeah, I'll go ahead. When I first was diagnosed, and it's probably the same for all of us, is you're kind of in a fog for a period of time, and that period of time, can vary depending upon the individual. Mine was probably about maybe a month, and then I said, well, the hell with it, we need to get on with our life. So doing research, what I did was I joined a support group that I now head up, and I was able to get an enormous amount of information from my peers, fellow patients. I looked up websites, I got involved with the Caring for Carcinoid, now the Net Research Foundation, and was able to secure quite a bit of information from that. I looked at some websites, and I compared them to other websites, and I looked at some blogs. Sometimes you can get caught up in some wild information that you get online. You just have to be sure that you look other places to see if it's validated, or talk to, as I did, with people in our support group.
So just another thing that's important to do is to attend conferences like this. There are conferences throughout the year all over the country, and it's becoming, I think, more popular. and they're just great sources of education.
And as a caregiver, I just want to say the same thing. I'm a retired nurse, but the first thing I did was Google what is carcinoid, because I had no idea. I wasn't an oncology nurse. I was never taught about carcinoid in my training. And like David and probably Leslie, searched the internet, did that, joined the first support group in Houston almost when it started, from its initiation. And I guess the only thing that I have to say about that, besides going to conferences and reading information that you get either on your email or you Google yourself, is that sharing your stories means you're not alone. And that's really, really important, so that you don't feel like you're the only one out there with this rare disease that isn't so rare anymore, that nobody knows how to treat or what's going to happen to you. So.
Glenora and Dennis, what was your experience?
Great. Much the same as the others here. We were blessed by having, you know, a very active support group, and provided a lot of information to us, my wife and I. My medical oncologist at the time was pretty up on this, and was a source of really good information as well.
Anything, Dan?
And currently, there are a lot of, I know it sounds silly, but there's a lot of things to follow on Twitter. There are a lot of accounts. There's people that are in the United Kingdom that have blogs that, you know, and so you can kind of see how their treatment is progressing in different parts of the world, and they mention things, and then you Google that and look that up, and you can discuss it with your doctor, or just, you know, see if it's something that fits what's going on with you. So there's, you know, you don't just have to look up carcinoid. You can look up actual people who are, you know, in different phases of treatment and see what they've done and where they are. So that's interesting to me, but that's what we've done.
So I think that's a natural reaction these days. If we want to learn about something, we Google it. The problem when you Google a lot of things is that you see
It's overwhelming.
an overwhelming amount of information, and it's hard to know what information is valid and what isn't. Have any of you had experiences where you've had to double check things, or have you had that overwhelming, you know, Google mania?
Yeah, and I mean, that's what I was saying. I've been on a few blogs where the people have a set feeling of this is the gospel, and when you look at other items on the internet, different websites, you find out that there's a partial truth there. So that's what I mean. You have to kind of be careful on just taking everything as the gospel. And that what's really good with our group, and actually all of us are in the Houston support group, we compare notes. We talk about it. We talk about, well, I heard this, what do you think, or has it occurred to you? So personal experience from our peers is extremely important. It not just about the disease itself, but about the drugs, the treatments. I mean, we can compare notes. How did this drug affect you? Have you had this drug? Have you had this treatment? Now, all the patients up here at this table have had PRRT. One in Houston, one in Rotterdam, and one in Basel, Switzerland. And we've compared notes. You know, how did this affect you? I spoke to somebody that's here earlier. He had been in Rotterdam also. So you know, that the peer exchange, I think, is extremely, extremely important. You just have to be careful when you get on some of these blogs or some of these websites. Some of them use them for a platform for things that just aren't totally accurate.
So that brings up a good question about, you know, when you have this information and you have a physician that you're working with, what suggestions would you have for perhaps newly diagnosed patients who have found a physician they're working with? How do you make sure that that physician-patient communication is as effective as possible and meets your needs as a patient and as a caregiver?
You know, I think that probably most of us in the room know that it's best to try to find a specialist that works with neuroendocrine tumors. But even then, you have to really sort of know your own stuff, because some doctors, and I've had this issue, consider themselves specialists, but they really don't know what they don't know. And when you're having to bring your doctor information and research papers, you just need to know almost more about it, and to find a good specialist. You know, work with someone who has a lot of experience in neuroendocrine.
Well, I felt like we were kind of fortunate in that being in Houston, Texas, there are specialists here. As I was going through my treatment, the first thing in 2007 was surgery, and then I would look online and see that actually was following the standard of care. So I felt pretty comfortable that was the route to go, and then, you know, kind of going from there. Back in 2007, there really wasn't much available as far as research or literature, even for Houston or on the internet. And as Dave mentioned, a lot of it was kind of, you know, down one particular avenue or the other based on what that particular person had uncovered. So it did take a fair amount of communication with the physician to better understand it. But I think it's a bit of trial and error.
Well, you didn't mention that in 2008, Dennis was patient 1 for the original, or
Yeah.
he was the first patient to do the Indium 111 here in Houston through right? XL Diagnostics. So that was the precursor to the LU 177. And he had very good results, I guess, as I understand it, and I'm not a clinician, but some people respond better to the PRRT type. They do better, uptick, the tumors uptake the receptors better. Yeah. And he happens to be someone that has very positive results on that. So that was, after he had that therapy, it was like he had never had anything. He didn't lose any weight. Was a blossoming 200 pounds and had about 6-7 years of just no symptoms, no syndrome, nothing, and then it did recur. But so that's why he had the second PRRT, the LU 177, which he's just finished the treatment for. So that's kind of always been the way his has been treated. He's also getting the shots, the monthly shots, but
well, the thing is,
wasn't
too,
many options.
I thought I was cured. I thought this was in my rearview mirror, and I didn't have to ever think about this again. This disease sneaks up on you, and boy, when it's pissed, it is really, really mad. And I found out just how uninformed I was by thinking I was cured. I will never think that again.
Yeah, don't fool yourself.
I think one of the other important things as a caregiver is, if at all possible, to go to the specialist appointments with your patient, your NOID. And because a lot of times they want to hear something and they're not hearing what the doctor's saying, might not write down and ask the questions that they need to ask, or when they leave the office have a different perception of what was said. So I think it's really important for the caregiver to do that as much as possible.
Yeah, and that is extremely important. I know that my wife, some of our toughest arguments have been going over what the doctor told us, and she just says I can't hear, So,
Right. Well, and the patient, too, is more emotional, I think, than the caregiver, so
yeah.
it helps.
And Cheryl and Glenora, your questions as a family member or caregiver, your questions are going to be different. Did you have any experiences where it was difficult for you to get your questions answered?
The main question that I've had that's always been kind of, is the diet issue. Foods to avoid, foods to eat. Is there any help for the syndrome, type, the diarrhea? Is there any kind of specific diet you should follow? I've never gotten, it's always small meals, frequent small meals, keep your protein up, it's just, that's always been just a mystery.
So some of those
There's no,
symptom-
and then I just met someone who
symptom
said-
management
Yeah,
sessions.
the symptom management, if there's any other ways of symptom management besides, drugs and medications, yeah.
I never really had any problems getting questions answered. I guess the hardest part was in the beginning, because the only drug available was everolimus or Afinitor, and Joyce lost a whole lot of weight on Afinitor and was pretty sick. And there's really nothing that you can do for the side effects, because it was effective in her tumors not growing, her tumorettes. But eventually that changed as more became available. And so I think the hardest part was, again, knowing what to give her, what to eat. I'd take her out to dinner and she'd want something really bad and then not be able to take a bite. And it gets real frustrating for the caregivers then. That's what I hear Glenora saying. You as women or any other caregiver, you nourish people. And when you can't do that, you feel helpless. And so then you keep asking, what else can we do? There must be something else.
Yeah, one thing I'd like to add, and I know my wife is going to like this. You got to remember as a patient that your caregiver is in this just as much as you are. And I know that in the beginning, I tried to restrict her questioning because either I was embarrassed or I didn't think it was important. It is important. You need to let the caregiver ask her questions. You need to have them just as much as involved in it as you are, because they are. Don't belittle it. I did in the beginning, and it was a mistake. I don't do that anymore. And now I work as a volunteer for CanCare, and I really stress that it is, it's both of you and your family, and you may have multiple caregivers, but it's just as important to them because they're going through it just as much as you are.
Other comments about that? So I think one or two of you already mentioned the changing nature of symptoms, the changing nature of the disease, where, Dennis, you talked about essentially having a second diagnosis. How do you deal with that uncertainty, not only as a patient, but also as a family member or a caregiver? And what insight would you have for everyone else in our audience or on our live stream? How do you live your best life and try to deal with the disease as well?
I would say that you always have to just be flexible in terms of watching how your body is responding. Don't think that you've got a set of rules and they're set in place, because they're always rotating. You were talking about foods that Dennis can and can't eat. I find that changes all the time. You might not be able to eat tomatoes because they make you sick or they increase your diarrhea, and you stop eating them, and 3 years later you try them again and you're fine. So it's a matter of just not getting stuck and knowing that you're always going to have challenges, and you have to just rotate with those challenges. Be flexible.
I think I'm still trying to figure that one out too. It's I had gone through a period of losing so much weight that that's what really pushed me into going back to the doctor to see what was going on. And what had happened is extensive metastatic liver disease, but it was from the carcinoid, from the original NET, that had microscopically metastasized, and nobody knew it really. And then the tumors grew and really started to affect me physically, much more so than when I had the primary diagnosis. And so all that weight loss of stamina, strength, energy, it was pretty bad for a while. And that's what kind of pushed me to go back in and get, again, treatment, and hopefully now on a better path towards, again, some survival, progression-free survival, or whatever the term is, and follow-up scans. And hopefully there'll be something new in another few years that can be used to, again, extend that progression-free length of time.
You know, one of the things that I found out about this disease, and it happened in the first conference that I went to in New Orleans, I think it was 2009, maybe 2010. And there was a gentleman there, he was actually a doctor from the Northwest, and he had the multivisceral organ transplant. And that's where they take all of your digestive organs out and replace them with somebody else's. And the concept there, and I may be wrong, the doctors, can jump in there anytime, but the concept was, well, they're going to take all of the disease out, put new organs in there that aren't diseased. So you've literally cured it by just getting rid of it. 2 years later in North Carolina, they had another conference, and this same doctor was back, and the disease was back. So what that told me in my growth in knowledge of this disease is that it's in your system, and until they find a cure, it's going to be in your system. You're going to have periods of non-progression. You're going to have periods of progression. I call it the bumps in the road, and it's just you get it in your mind and understand that, and as you move forward, you go for that next bump in the road, and that next bump in the road might be a year, maybe 5 years, it may be a couple of months. But it's there until the good doctors, and the researchers find a cure.
I was going to say one thing. It's kind of just people always say, cancer is something that the current approach, I guess, that you hear a lot is that it's something that you live with, not something that's going to kill you right away. It's something that you can live with. And, while I see that, and that's what we try to do, kind of live day to day and enjoy every day, but it is kind of discouraging that you don't hear as much about how they're going to cure the disease. And maybe that's just my point of view. Because I really don't think when people say it's a battle, I don't think it's a battle. I mean, nobody chooses to get into this fight. It's just bad luck that it happened to you, and you just kind of have to accept that your luck isn't as great as somebody else's, but you didn't walk out of the house and get in a terrible car accident. It's like everybody has something in their life. We don't walk around with little signs over our head that what's wrong. So you just have to accept that it's your burden or your caregiver's burden, but it's, everybody has something, so.
So in the face of that, what strategies do you use to try to keep equilibrium, good general health, to cope as best as you can, both from the patient side and also the family and the caregiver side? What have you learned over this time?
I go to the gym a lot. And I don't talk about it with the people I work with, because that's like I'm a teacher. So I don't talk about it at work as much because that's where I go, where I don't have to think about it. And so that's my happy place. And it's not that home is a sad place, but it's like, and to relieve stress, really hard exercise to me is the best thing to do. Run, walk, whatever it takes, because then your mind kind of goes into that, state where you're just sort of relaxed. And I think that's very valuable. And I've gotten him into walking too, so. And get a dog and walk the dog and have something that you have to do every day. Seriously, if the dog is sitting there, you got to get up and walk the dog. You can't, things like that just kind of make life normal, but keep you on a routine are, I think, healthy.
I think exercise is really important just for keeping your mind and your body healthy. And when I have one of those days when I hate to go to the gym and I just don't want to go, I just always tell myself or remind myself how much easier it is to get out of a hospital bed when you have this huge incision all the way down your body. If you have good upper body strength, it's much easier to pull yourself out of that hospital bed. So that's always my motivation in getting back to the gym.
Mine is just live your life, live a life, have a life. I ski, I hunt, I play golf, I travel. I try to live as, as normal of a life as we can with that 10,000-pound elephant still in the room. Here we are, we're all, stage whatever, and do we look it? For the most part, no. We have a very serious illness, but we don't really look it. If it's a state of mind from our standpoint, and we just continue to do things. I use it to my advantage. I don't get strokes very often from my playing partners, but I try. And I still ski, as much as I can. We just got back from Turks and Caicos. We just enjoy life.
And I hear a lot of positive attitude in all the patients. And my friend Joyce has a real positive attitude. My philosophy is kind of fake it till you make it. Because people will come up and they'll say, oh, you don't have cancer, you look too good. And you can't just stop and explain the whole carcinoid thing to them. So generally you just say, thank you, and turn around and walk away. But I think positivity and faith and keeping your routine, like they said, as much as possible. We went on a cruise to the Greek islands. We've done several crazy things that we might not have ordinarily done. But every day is a new day. Some days, one of us doesn't feel as good as the other because we're getting older. So it's important to take me days too, not only for the caregiver, but for the patient.
What's a me day? Describe one.
Do whatever you want or nothing if that's what you want to do. Read a book, watch a movie, go to a movie, just do something for yourself. Hobby, paint with a twist, things like that kind of take your mind off of things.
Everyone else do me days?
I don't know. I don't.
Have a me summer.
You're not old enough.
Yeah.
Take the summer for that.
You'll learn.
So one of the other areas I know that we get a lot of questions at the foundation are about a lot of ancillary resources, not necessarily the support groups, but the other resources that are out there to assist patients and families, and it can be everything from transportation, financial assistance with some organizations. Are there any that you've found are particularly helpful that you think newly diagnosed patients and their families need to know about to kind of round out the opportunities to best manage this illness?
Well, I had a situation here 2 weeks ago. A young lady called me from El Paso, Texas, that had been recently diagnosed. She had no money, and she was just kind of desperate. She was on, I think, Medicaid, and I called Boston, talked to my friends at the Net Research Foundation, and they did some research and found a charity group that offers assistance for cancer patients with transportation and financial assistance for getting treatments. And I believe now she's in treatment, I believe in Louisiana. I'm a part of as I said earlier, part of the CanCare group of volunteers where they match cancer patients or recovered cancer patients with newly diagnosed cancer patients. A real good organization that helps you through the beginning process. And then I know you said, but the support groups I've found where you're talking peer-to-peer has been just invaluable to us, Kim and I, and I get from the people that I talk to constantly. I get calls from all over the country because they go on a website, find that we're the head of a support group, and they call me. And we're not doctors, but we're experiencing it. And we can talk about symptoms, we can talk about reactions to drugs, we can talk about what happened when you were first diagnosed. How do you do this? Where do I get information? Things like that. All of us, caregivers and patients, are reservoirs of very good information. Just information, we're not doctors. You want a doctor? They're sitting over here on the other side of the room. We're just patients. And we can just, share our life experiences with this disease.
David, one question, we know that there are a lot of patients who are out there who are not in major metropolitan areas, or they don't have access to support groups. So would you have any suggestions for that patient population? Is it to try to connect electronically with a support group or find
Yes.
the closest one? What would you recommend?
Both. I know that I've been called from all over the country because people have looked on your company's or your organization's website, or they've gone on to other websites and found our names, and I'm constantly talking to people, and then I try to help them find somebody in their proximity, or hook them up with a group that specializes in setting up support groups, so that they have an avenue. Being a CanCare volunteer, we don't ever turn anybody away, and it's the same with the support group. We don't turn anybody away. You may not be in Houston, but hey, I'm going to help you where I can. In fact, I had somebody call me from Los Angeles, actually from Hollywood, and there's a support group a real good friend of mine runs in Los Angeles, and I was able to put them together. They just didn't realize it was there. There's other support groups. I know Josh Mailman's got one in Northern California that's just a reservoir of information, and he's another one that is very, very helpful. Bob and Marianne in New York, I forget the name of it, Can or something? Can? NCAN. Excellent group, excellent source of information. And we're listed on their website as well. So if you're looking for someone to talk to, you go to one of those websites and find one if they're in your area, or talk to them, and that's what they do with me.
I think, David, you just woke up a memory for me. I can remember when I was newly diagnosed calling the Neuroendocrine Cancer Awareness Network, which was then C-SCAN, Carcinoid, and speaking with someone who just was a good listener and sent me a lot of information and was very willing to talk and to answer questions.
And you'll find that most of these support groups, they have all the information. They have copies of all of the, like me, all of the drugs that I've been on, and I've been on every drug that's been approved. I've got all of the documentation from MD Anderson that tells you about the drug, and it's not proprietary, so it's easy to send a copy of it to you, so you can understand what the drugs are, what is available, and help you with identifying doctors in your area or regional specialty centers that we would recommend that you try to pursue getting an appointment and seeing. Again, it's extremely important with this disease, because it is rare, that you get to a specialty center that knows what they're doing. I don't know how many times we've seen members of our support group or people call me from outside of the area where they've been to a doctor that's kind of made them worse, and because they don't know what they're doing. And we try to get them directed to somebody. And it doesn't have to be my doctor. It's just a doctor in the area, which we become aware of through attending these conferences. And again, these conferences, as Leslie said, are extremely informative, especially when there's changes going on. If there hasn't been any changes in a couple of years, you're just hearing the same thing over and over again the next time. But again, if you haven't been, highly recommend that you take the time. They're free. All you got to do is get there.
They're not all free, but
Most of them are. It's well worth your time. Well worth your time.
And I think for not only people in the audience, but anyone joining us electronically, we certainly make the videos available from our conferences, which are free, out on our website, so people can pick and choose by subject and look at the presentations from past conferences. We also take a lot of calls in the office from someone who wants to know either are there physicians in their area, how can they connect to a support group. So we serve as connectors as well, and we're happy to talk to patients at any time to make sure that they feel like they have a path to start to connect with other people.
You know, I think with LU 177 now being approved by the FDA, I hope, and I do believe, that there'll be a real explosion of awareness now, because even though it's been out there, it's been very hard to really find. You know, you had to go to a state like Texas that has a right to try law, and not every state does, not many do really. Insurance companies weren't paying for it, Medicare wouldn't pay for it. So now all of a sudden, the way those companies have avoided reimbursing for the therapy is really gone. And even though they'll still fight to not do it, because that's the way they make their money, it won't be as easy for them to avoid reimbursing. And I think every state in the country will start to offer PRRT and LU 177. So that should really increase the awareness of this.
So I'd like to ask everyone on the panel, if there are one or two things that you wish you knew earlier on in your experience that you know now, to share with everyone in the audience. Cheryl, do you want to start? Start from that end. And
We were told in the beginning back in 2005 to expect, I think, 5 years without growth, but they didn't know much after that time. But I guess there wasn't anything else to know. I guess I wish there had been more knowledge at the time, but the knowledge and the research and the advocacy has come from the patients and caregivers themselves, and so it's really important, and I wish I had known how important it is to be active in supporting the carcinoid efforts, and your primary care physician talking to them about, I'm going to this carcinoid doctor, you know, but I need you to communicate together about what other things I need. Because the carcinoid doctors are specialists. They don't always take care of everything. Mm-hmm. So it's real important. I think I wish I would have known some of that type of.
so what strategies did you use? Because you do need a coordinated team of caregivers.
Well,
How did you foster that communication?
Luckily, Joyce is very outspoken. And so she has a doctor, a PCP that she'd been going to for years. And it wasn't a real effort for her to say, this is who I'm going to for my lung doctor. And this is what I'm taking, and you know, and communicating with the nurses back and forth. So that wasn't hard. And as for myself, I guess I just started educating and going to the conferences. And I think our first was New Orleans too. I can't remember because we've been to several others. So we even went to Nashville to a conference just to particularly see Dr. Eric Liu, because Dr. Albert from Sweden, who specializes in pulmonary carcinoid, was going to be there. So we actually got an appointment with him. And it's just kind of making yourself do things like that and learn about things like that. But you have to do it. Nobody's going to do it for you. You know. And I wish I'd have known how much of that there was. You can't just sit back and wait for somebody to say, oh, you need to go see the cardiologist, or you need to go see whoever. Or you can talk to a social worker, you can talk to a support group leader, you know. But we were lucky to get involved.
Leslie, what do you wish you had known sooner?
Probably just how much effort I was going to have to put into learning about this cancer. Because my original thought was, okay, it's cancer, you know, the doctor will tell me what to do and that's it. I'm not going anywhere other than my hometown, which was then Denver. I wasn't going anywhere for treatment. And I learned that that was not going to cut it, that I had to really get involved. I had to know as much or try to learn as much as I thought my doctor knew. And sometimes I felt like I needed to know more than my doctor knew. So there are times when you're just organizing all your paperwork and your labs and coordinating your doctors, and sometimes I feel like it's a part-time job just to manage this cancer. But, you know, that's sort of like one of the bumps in the road. Then things calm down and things settle and you're not dealing with so many doctor's appointments. Things are more in remission, although we know we're never in remission completely. But anyway, there are times when you just feel like this is a part-time job, just managing your health, and you have to accept that and just move forward.
I wish there would have been, and it's unusual to say this in Houston, but I wish there would have been a support group that was available when I was first diagnosed. Ours got, I think Jan started ours 2 years or a year after I was diagnosed, because there's so much information available from your peers. The thing is, you know, when I got diagnosed, you know, you get diagnosed in Houston, you're lucky because, you know, you got the greatest hospitals in the world in Houston, and especially with this type of cancer. And the research that I did online, all of the documents and the papers that came up had Yao J, you know, at the bottom of them. And, you know, unbeknownst to me, the doctor that I got assigned to was Yao J. So there was a sense of trust right there from my research. Not that I don't trust Dr. Yao. I would have liked to have been able to look at some other things and understood, you know, a lot more, whereas I just came in carte blanche, whatever you say, doc, I'm going to do, and I did. It was only after the first round of treatments I said, let's talk about it, you know.
But that shows advocacy and education.
Exactly.
And being willing to,
Exactly.
to question.
Right.
Yeah, I think we would say the same thing. It's just a lot of time spent looking at options. Dennis also had, it's just a lot of time looking at options, reading. Dennis also had prostate cancer diagnosis 3 years ago. And that, again, was one of those, that fortunately with that, it's a you have the time, you have the luxury of looking. But in that one, we changed doctors. So you just have to be able to, you know, spend the time and be willing to spend the time. And he's great at that. I mean, he spends a lot of time, does a lot of research, and so much more science-based than I am. So he does a real good job of it. But you have to spend the time doing that and the time doing the financial piece of it, which is dealing with your insurance company. And, you know, it's just something that you have to accept, that there's a lot of things, and you're the only one that knows everything about you. You know, each doctor knows a piece, but you're the one that has all the information, and you have to make sure that you keep that in mind. You're the expert on yourself, really. Not the treatment, but everything that your body's been through, you know the best, so.
What I wish I would have done differently would have been to have stayed on top of it, gone back in for follow-up scans, and caught, and again, I'll never have the illusion that this isn't going to come back. It's coming back, regardless of the treatment that I just finished or treatment that I'll get, hopefully, a few years, whatever it is. I'll never be under the illusion again that I'm cured. So I will, and that's something, if I had done that and stayed on top of it, wouldn't have changed the fact that it came back, but I know it would have changed how sick I got. I didn't have to get that sick. I could have had intervention and not put myself or my family through it.
So vigilance and...
Yeah, it's important.
Well, we do have a few questions from the audience. Let's see if we can take a look at those.
Yeah, it's right there.
Okay, a good question. What do we tell paramedics when someone in the family has a crisis due to neuroendocrine tumors? Anyone want to comment? Maybe.
Just one thing that I've always make sure I mention to all doctors and especially to paramedics is no epinephrine. You know, I think that was listed as one of the 5 E's that we're supposed to avoid epinephrine, but I always mention that because that could create more problems for you. If you're already in a crisis, you sure don't need to be administered a medication that involves epinephrine.
Anyone else? Okay, all right. What difficulties do you have in the hospital after surgeries?
Well, following bowel surgery, which is what I had for removal of the tumor and then bowel obstruction after that, it's really just having major abdominal surgery. So, you know, the surgical site, getting back to eating, you know, different complications that arise from that. But those were primarily related to the surgeries I had.
All right, someone in the audience who is new to the community, are people using the terms carcinoid and net interchangeably?
You know, when we were first diagnosed, carcinoid was considered the mid, the hind, and the rear gut, and I guess the lung nodes. And then the pancreatic was called the PNETs. And
David, can you speak up just a little bit, please?
I'm sorry. Usually I'm not told you can't hear me. When we originally diagnosed, the carcinoid was associated with the gut and the lungs, and then the pancreatic was considered what they called PNET, pancreatic neuroendocrine tumors. I don't know what it is now.
So carcinoid as a term has fallen out of favor a bit, although all of us, doctors and patients alike, still use it because it fits so well. In fact, if you go back before you were diagnosed, they used to call them pancreatic carcinoids before they became islet cell tumors. But generally, it's that extra pancreatic bucket, so everything other than a pancreatic net, people still call carcinoid.
Yeah, the question about the insurance company, I know that Josh Mailman, our colleague and friend from Northern California, had PRT in Germany, and he took it to, he's from California, but I think he had Blue Cross Blue Shield, and he took it to them and got it paid. I had Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Texas and had my treatments in Rotterdam and took it to Blue Cross Blue Shield, and they've never responded. So,
Yeah, and insurance plans vary by state, but I would direct you to NorCal Carcinet's website, because
Yes.
Josh has put out some wonderful information about the entire appeal process to really understand that. And how to work with your insurance company. It's also important to work with your physicians, because many times they can do some conversations with the insurance company. So if this is something that you're currently experiencing, go to NorCal Carcinet's website, look at some of the insurance information there, and it'll be kind of a good introduction to how this process works. And again, this is self-advocacy on a slightly different level, so it is complicated. But that's I think that's a great suggestion to start to understand that particular type of information.
I would just say that, of course, I'm a patient here at MD Anderson, and I have not had any insurance problem that they weren't able to resolve. They know the word, the code that needs to be changed, and they'll it'll come back and they'll say, oh, no, and then they'll say, oh, I don't know who did this, and it goes back and it comes back paid. So I would say your first person to try is the hospital and say, I want you to be paid, and I don't know if I can do this. Can we look at this again? So it's a win-win for both of us.
All right, so great comment from someone in the audience. For those of you who may not have been able to hear that, if you do have an insurance issue, take it first to your provider, whether that's the hospital or the physician, because they'll have the expertise. The coding system has changed within the last several years, so now we have thousands and thousands of codes, and it's very important from a billing standpoint to use the right one. So your provider should know they're providing you that treatment, and feel free to question the insurance company and to work with your treatment team to try to work out any issues. And if you're being cared for at a place that does have a specialized program, then they should have even more of that expertise because they've seen multiple patients with the same treatment or the same situation. So I'm going to try to take one more question, and maybe difficult from the audience. But
Can you just repeat the name of the website that you referred to?
Yes.
In the previous comment?
Yes, be happy to. It is NorCal, so Norcal, Carcinet, Carcinet, it's probably a .org? I think .org, but it is the Northern California Net Support Group. And again, it is Josh Millman's website and support group, wonderful resource information. He does a great job. So check that out and see if that is helpful to you. All right, we have
The other thing, let me just add one, as far as Josh goes, if you are in a position where you'd like to see about getting disability, Josh is a great reference for that as well.
Again, another very specialized process. So that's a great suggestion. Thank you, Dennis. All right, I just want to ask our panelists for any other final thoughts. We talked a little bit about attitude, about being flexible, but what other insight would you share with the group that you haven't had the opportunity to do to this point in the panel? What would your best suggestion be for everyone? Dennis, do you want to start?
Oh, boy. I don't know. I think, yeah, have a good wife, have a good support person, that's for sure.
Glenora?
Really, I don't. It's just you have to take it one day at a time, and you have to accept it, and just do the best that you can for yourself and for your family. So, yeah.
Okay, find a doctor you trust. If you don't trust the doctor you got, find another one, okay? Do your research. Don't waste his time. Do your research when you go in there. If you have questions, ask the questions. And of the utmost, have a life and live it. Enjoy your time with your family, friends, and caregiver.
Yeah, I think it's important that you don't hide from your diagnosis. Don't be embarrassed to say that you have cancer, but don't make it your identity.
I agree with all of them. I think that being attentive with your best friend, your spouse, whatever, sometimes they just need to talk, and you just need to let them talk and listen and nod, and you might not have advice to give them because you don't know, but they just need to vent. And I think we all need to vent. That's why support groups are so important.
All right, I want to thank our panelists. Thank you for sharing with everyone. You've been wonderful. We appreciate all of you and your willingness to be a little bit on the spot today. So we are now going to take a break.